Every NFL team has some kind of iconic duo that has defined their season for better or for worse. And we're gonna run through all of them right now. This is every NFL team's most iconic duo of 2024. For Kansas City, it's the entire Chiefs team and their devil magic. No disrespect, their back-to-back championships are well-deserved, but they've clearly taken a step back this year. And yet their record hasn't, because they've apparently mastered the dark arts to win games they really don't deserve to be winning. We're talking a blocked chip shot field goal against the Broncos, needing a game-winning kick of their own to beat the Panthers, and a botched snap to hold on against the Raiders. I'm convinced the Chiefs don't even practice anymore. They just spend their week buying sage and making voodoo dolls of their opponents. For the Chargers, their duo is Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. Find you a man that looks at you the way Harbaugh looks at Herbert. I think this man would die for his quarterback. In hindsight, it's funny. When Harbaugh got hired, there was speculation that he would trade Herbert and try to draft his college quarterback, JJ McCarthy. Now, I'm pretty sure Jim would unplug JJ's life support to charge Justin's iPad. Nothing like a good bromance based on nothing but love and ball. For the Broncos, it's Bo Nix and a great offensive line. I wasn't the biggest fan of Bo Nix during the draft process, and I still don't think he's a world beater, but I'll say two things. One, he has definitely impressed me this season and is better than I thought. And two, the Broncos have done an unbelievable job protecting. It's a lot easier to reach your potential when it seems like your O-line has a restraining order against the defense. The man has been kept cleaner than Tom Brady's diet. And again, you still have to make the right decisions even with good protection, so this isn't meant to discredit him. It's just nice when that protection is so effective, it might as well be a titanium condom. For the Raiders, it's Brock Bowers and a backpack, because he is carrying this team in terms of competitiveness, watchability, everything. He's all they got. Vegas is a raging dumpster fire right now. They fired their OC mid-season, traded Devontae Adams, their own head coach is calling them the worst team in football. It's almost exclusively bad vibes. There would be effectively no reason for you to watch the Raiders over watching paint dry if not for Brock Bowers. He's one of the league leaders in receiving yards, he's an athletic specimen, he just does things tight ends, especially rookie tight ends, are not supposed to do, while doing something that no tight end or anyone else wants to do, and that's playing for the Raiders. Thank you for making them halfway watchable, Brock. Your sacrifice is appreciated. The Ravens' iconic duo is Justin Tucker and the Age Cliff, because my dude has fallen off it. I'm sure a lot of you expected the Ravens duo to be Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, or Derrick Henry and a complete disregard for the well-being of his opponents, considering how much that signing has shaped their season. But I'm going with something that has the potential to tank this promising season if they're not careful. Justin Tucker might as well change his name to Justin Pucker, because that's what happens to the booty holes of Ravens fans every time he attempts a kick lately. The greatest kicker of all time is broken right now, and Baltimore will be playing with fire if they take this version of him into the playoffs. For the Steelers, it's Russell Wilson and George Pickens. Here comes the airplane. See, I do actual player combos too. When the Steelers got off to a 4-2 start with Justin Fields at quarterback, I didn't really understand why they'd make the switch to Russell Wilson. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, it turns out Russ's propensity for throwing the deep ball, combined with George Pickens being the result if you told someone to build a deep ball receiver in a lab, makes for one of the most effective pairings since peanut butter and jelly. Now, if Pickens can just figure out his anger issues, we'll be all set. Wonder which one Pickens would be out of peanut butter and jelly. Like, which one of those gives you more of an angry vibe? Probably peanut butter. That guy can get crunchy sometimes. Speaking of anger, the Bengals' iconic duo for 2024 is Joe Burrow and an intense, seething rage. The Bengals are legitimately making history with an unprecedented combination of great offense and terrible defense. Honestly, that probably could have been their duo in itself. Cincinnati has 4 losses when scoring 33 or more points this year. The rest of the NFL combined has 2. And this has resulted in Joe Burrow looking like he wants to kill someone on a weekly basis. Burrow is playing the best football of his career, and it's being wasted by a defense that can't stop a nosebleed. In fact, they're somehow making the nosebleed worse. This defense is like a tissue covered in thumbtacks. For the Browns, it's Deshaun Watson and karma. It honestly didn't feel real that a guy who had faced essentially 0 consequences for his heinous actions up to this point would finally be dealt just a shred of justice in the form of his Achilles snapping like a rubber band. But I guess the universe works in mysterious ways. The only downside is it saved the Browns from themselves, because they were ready to ride out the season with this massive waste of money. And they deserve to suffer too. But at least we don't have to see Groper Cleveland on our TVs every week. And who knows, maybe it'll be more painful in the long run for the Browns to see what their season could have been if they just played the more deserving quarterback from the start. For the Bills, it's Josh Allen and being sick and tired of the Chiefs. It feels like Josh Allen is on a mission this year. There was concern that Allen's production would take a hit, and while he is on pace for fewer yards this year, his touchdowns, both through the air and on the ground, are basically the exact same. But more importantly, his interceptions are way down. He's playing clean, smart football. Still aggressive, but calculated. The best way I can put it is he's playing enlightened. Like, I know this is what I have to do to finally take down the Chiefs. And hey, it's already worked once this year. For the Dolphins, it's Tua Tagovailoa and a blatant disregard for his own well-being. This one also could have been the entire Dolphins roster and sucking in the cold, but I'm sticking with this. Tua's gone from a sympathetic figure at the center of the NFL's concussion epidemic to just kind of dumb. And I'm not trying to be mean, I genuinely want the best for the guy. The problem is he doesn't seem to want the best for himself. He's apparently learned nothing about how to protect himself, considering his last concussion was caused by diving headfirst into a defender's knee, and then after spending a month on IR because of it, he comes back and gets kicked in the head trying to make a tackle. And what did he have to say about it? I wouldn't do anything different. Look, you can lead a concussed horse to water, but you can't make it wear a guardian cap, so I give up. For the Jets, it's the Jets and being the Jets. Some teams are just destined to stay bad forever, and the Jets might be at the top of that list. It was finally there for the taking this year. They got Aaron Rodgers back, their defense looked good, their skill group was loaded, their O-line was revamped. Everything was in place for the Jets to at least improve on last year, if not make a Super Bowl run. But they didn't improve. they didn't even stay the same. The 2024 Jets are somehow worse than the Zach Wilson-led group from a year ago. A genuinely fascinating feat that very few teams could pull off. At this point, the only thing that might save them is a full rebrand so they can rid themselves of the curse of just being the Jets. Or their incompetent owner could step down. Either way. The Patriots duo is Drake May and the spirit of Michael Vick, minus the dog thing. You guys already know how I feel about Drake May overall. As a Patriots fan, we've got our guy. Wrap it up, we're good, time to focus on everything else. And you guys have probably noticed that my boy is pretty mobile. But what you might not know is that Drake May is currently on track to break the single season yards per carry record for quarterbacks held by Michael Vick, who set it with 8.4 back in 2006. May is averaging 9.1. So on top of all the impressive throws he's made this year that have made me salivate over what he might do when he's not throwing to something called an Austin Hooper, he's also historically mobile. Pretty good for a rookie quarterback. For the Texans, it's their offensive line and sucking. This could have just been the Brock Bowers backpacking thing again, just with Joe Mixon. But instead, let's highlight the reason the Texans offense is still bad despite Mixon's efforts. The offensive line has been god awful at pass blocking. They've got CJ Stroud seeing ghosts like he's in his Sam Darnold Jets era every snap. But that's assuming the ball actually got snapped without Laramie Tunsil false starting again. I haven't dealt with a line this irritating since I went to the DMV. For the Colts, it's Anthony Richardson and the bench. These two have been through a lot together. First, Richardson went there when he wasn't supposed to, then he spent a few weeks there, and then he came back from there as a new man, apparently. It felt like a death sentence for his Colts career at the time, but turns out getting benched might have been the best thing for him. Now, I'm not giving the Colts any credit for that because I firmly believe if Joe Flacco lit it up after Richardson's benching, Richardson wouldn't have seen the field the rest of the year. But lucky for Indianapolis, this isn't a test where you have to show your work. They got to the right answer, and that's all that matters. The Jaguars' iconic duo is the front office and a blindfold, because how in the world does Doug Peterson still have a job? The only explanation is the front office isn't watching, because this guy has had the most textbook get fired mid-season season of all time. He's in year 3 with a team that's supposed to be ascending, or at the very least competent, but instead has fallen completely on its face to the point they might get the #1 pick in the draft. It's gotten so bad that Peterson himself has basically suggested his own firing, saying things like the team needs a culture change. Gee, I wonder who that starts with. The only other explanation I can think of for why he's still around is the Jags are punishing him by not firing him. Basically a rub the dog's nose in its own pee kind of thing. Gross. For the Titans, it's Will Levis and meme-worthy pictures. I would have never thought that in a season where Jameis Winston ended up starting that he would have a rival for most memeable quarterback in the league. But Levis has provided us with gem after gem all year long. Whether it's the hands on his head after a pick, the most ill-advised lateral and thus fumble I've ever seen from someone not named Jacoby Myers, or the boo-boo face on the bench, Levis has almost single-handedly kept the NFL meme economy afloat. It's just too bad he won't be able to give us these moments much longer since he stinks at football. Now before we get to the NFC teams, we do have a new partner on this channel that makes videos like this possible, and that is MyBookie. So for my sports bettors out there, first and foremost, of course, do it responsibly. But if you want to support me, give MyBookie a shot. I'll definitely be making a few bets this Sunday now that most of my fantasy teams are cooked. And if you want to join me, use code BENCHWARMER when you sign up to get your first deposit matched up to $1,000. Or you can just click the link in the description for the same effect. Now, I'm a big player prop kind of guy, so here's what I'm looking at this weekend. I'm going with Adam Thielen over 51.5 receiving yards. He's been lighting it up ever since Bryce Young decided to be a real quarterback. I'm going with Jalen Waddle over 56.5 receiving yards because it seems like the Dolphins are finally getting their actual wide receivers involved. And Waddle's gone over this line in 2 of his last 3 games after only doing it twice all season before that. Seems like he's on a bit of a heater. And lastly, I'm going with Brian Robinson over 79.5 rushing yards against the Saints. New Orleans is in shambles and they stink against the run. Washington should be able to control this game. So if you get a few minutes this weekend, or even when you're done watching this video, check out MyBookie, see what the vibes are like, and remember, use code BENCHWARMER when you sign up. All right, back to the video. The Lions' iconic duo is Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, aka Sonic and Knuckles. For some of these duos, it's best not to overthink it. And there is nothing that has defined the Lions season more than their 1-2 punch at running back. The Lions are 4th in the league in rushing, but all 3 teams above them have their quarterback averaging at least 40 rushing yards per game. Jared Goff averages 3, and Detroit's still right there. That's how good this backfield is as the engine of the highest scoring offense in football. You know a duo is good when people look at it and decide it needs a nickname, because that's what they did with Sonic and Knuckles. Now allow me to suggest an alternative. Chicken and Noodle, because they're the main ingredients in Campbell's offensive soup. Huh? No? Okay. For the Vikings, it's Brian Flores and a blender, because that's what he's been putting opposing offenses in all season. Dude's been making smoothies out of these teams. Whether it's Stroudberry Banana, Black Raspberry, Pina Kylerda, I'm so sorry. Point is, he took a defense that was pretty middle of the pack last year and turned it into Minnesota's entire identity. Don't get me wrong, Sam Darnold's playing well, but he's not better than pre-injury Kirk Cousins, and the Vikings only went 4-4 with him last year. What's making the difference is Flores turning this defense into the most imposing purple entity since Thanos. And when he snaps, half your offense forgets how to play football. For the Packers, it's Jordan Love and the voices in his head. Shout out Randy Orton. Green Bay's season will hinge on if Jordan Love lets the intrusive thoughts win or not. Despite sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for years, Love's play style is very Brett Favre-ish, in that he's capable of making plays that no one else can make, but he's also capable of making some of the most head-scratching mistakes you've ever seen. Look no further than the throw that got them eliminated from the playoffs last year. If he can just harness his talents into making good plays and ignore the devil on his shoulder telling him to fire a deep ball into triple coverage, the Packers can be real contenders. The 2024 Bears season will be largely remembered for a man who's not part of the organization anymore. Their iconic duo is Matt Eberflus and his inability to read a clock. I'm not sure I've ever seen someone someone who was already on the hot seat make such an egregious mistake to put their firing over the top. I joked about Doug Peterson earlier, but he's just been generally incompetent. There's not really one miscue that has defined his tenure as the Jags head coach. But with Eberflus, it's like he heard the rumors and was like, oh, you want to fire me? Okay, watch this. On Thanksgiving, down by 3, with the world watching and a timeout in his pocket, he let 30 seconds run off the clock, leaving Caleb Williams with no time to do anything except chuck up a prayer to try and win the game. Now, maybe there were other factors in play as to why that last sequence took so long. I understand we may never know exactly what happened, but if you're Matt Eberflus and you see the process is taking too long, you need to call your timeout at some point just to reset. Instead, he held on to it, and now he's taking it with him all the way to the unemployment line. Maybe he could sell it on eBay, who knows. For the Falcons, it's their defense and a gloomy, rainy day, because gloomy, rainy days are signs of a low-pressure weather system, and this defense hasn't generated any pressure all season long. Man, if only Atlanta had the chance to draft a pass rusher with their first-round pick, like a Leatu Latu who has 4 sacks and is the 24th best pass rusher according to PFF, or Jared Verse who has 4.5 sacks and is the 13th best pass rusher. Meanwhile, you have to scroll down to number 43 before you find your first Falcon, because Atlanta as a team is dead last in the league in sacks and 5th worst in pressure percentage. Now I know, Kirk's been showing some cracks, so the Falcons are probably happy they have Michael Penix Jr. right now. But if they wanted to draft a quarterback, they could have just done that without signing Kirk Cousins and wasting their time pretending to go all in despite having a roster with a defensive hole the size of the Grand Canyon. God, this team makes me mad. For the Buccaneers, it's wide receivers and injuries. The Bucs started the season hotter than a jalapeno in a house fire. They're still the only team to beat the Lions and Eagles, who are widely considered the NFC's 2 strongest contenders. They started 4-2 with Baker Mayfield playing at an MVP level, everything was going great, and then the Baltimore game. Chris Godwin went down for the season, Mike Evans missed a month with a hamstring injury, and the Bucs lost 4 in a row. If Tampa Bay didn't lose their top weapons for a huge chunk of the season, they might have a stranglehold on the NFC South by now. Instead, they're lightly gripping its neck, at best. For New Orleans, it's the entire Saints team and whiplash. When Saints fans look back on this season, they'll remember going from fantasizing about a Super Bowl in their home stadium after the first 2 weeks, to watching their team crumble like a poorly constructed gingerbread house. Before the season started, I was certain Dennis Allen wouldn't make it through the year. But then they had those first 2 games, and I was like, oh, I guess I've never been more wrong about anything, ever. But as it turns out, their little explosion wasn't sustainable. It's kind of like when someone's dying and then one day they have a sudden burst of energy and clarity. It doesn't mean they're getting better. In fact, it means the end is closer than ever and you should probably start casket shopping. For the Panthers, it's Bryce Young and Lexapro, because my dude needed to calm down. He and Anthony Richardson have had pretty similar seasons. Started bad, got benched for a couple games, and then came back as seemingly a completely different player. Only difference is Richardson at least looked solid last year in between the injuries, while Bryce Young has been drowning for the last year and a half. I didn't think anything would get him back on track. But apparently, a couple weeks away from the spotlight, a chance to catch his breath, and maybe some prescription or non-prescription medicinal treatments were all it took for him to get rid of the yips. Welcome back, Bama Bryce Young. I guess you can hold off on getting your real estate license. For now. For the Seahawks, it's their offensive line and sucking. Seattle and Houston are basically blood brothers this season, and the blood is from their respective quarterbacks because they both get hit 10 times a game. There's a pretty clear parallel between these 2 teams. Both have terrible offensive lines, but both have enough surrounding talent plus a weak division so they still have a clear path to the playoffs. At the end of the day, though, it's hard to picture a deep run for either team with such a glaring weakness. Because right now, Seattle is like a kid playing with hand-me-down Legos. They desperately need some better blocks. For the Rams, it's wide receivers and injuries. Speaking of blood brothers with the Seahawks and Texans, the Rams and Bucs have had similar struggles too. Both teams have one of the top receiver duos in the league when healthy, but when healthy has been the issue. It got so bad for the Rams, there was speculation they might blow it up halfway through the year, but they toughed it out, and now they're doing stuff like hanging 44 points on the Buffalo Bills. They might still make the playoffs, but I gotta believe playoffs would be a foregone conclusion by now if Puka and Kupp didn't spend so much time in the blue tent the first half of the year that they had to pay rent. The 49ers' iconic duo of 2024 is their entire team and a Super Bowl hangover. We all owe Manti Te'o an apology, and no, not for the other thing. He came out during the preseason and said the 49ers look like an emotionally drained team, and while that seemed like a preseason overreaction from a guy whose opinion we had no real reason to care about, he nailed it. San Francisco is not the same team, and it's hard to believe that losing to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl for a second time and just not finishing the job year after year doesn't have something to do with that. Yes, they've had plenty of injuries, but the Niners have always been a disproportionately injured team to the rest of the league, and it's never affected them this much. San Fran needs as much liquid IV as they can get their hands on. Kick this hangover and come back better next year. For the Cardinals, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. and cardio. When you draft a wide receiver with the 4th overall pick in the NFL draft, conventional wisdom would tell you that that guy's probably going to be the focal point of his team's passing attack. Instead, it looks more like Marv is training for the Boston Marathon than becoming an alpha receiver, because this man isn't doing a whole lot besides running. Coming into the year, people thought Harrison could push for top 5 in the league in receiving yards. And not only is he nowhere close to that, he's barely top 5 among rookies, with guys like Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., and Ladd McConkey all having better years. I gotta think the Cardinals offense would be better than 18th in the league if they actually got something out of the guy they spent such a high pick on, instead of just watching him run wind sprints every week. For the Eagles, it's Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. Another situation where I just gotta go with an actual player combo because it's too good to ignore. When Saquon joined the Eagles, there were two schools of thought, especially within the fantasy community. Either the Eagles weren't going to lean on the tush push as much with Jason Kelce retiring, so they had to bring in a real running back to compensate, or Saquon was never going to see the end zone because he was joining the team that runs the tush push constantly. Well, the Eagles said porque no los dos, because while Hurts plunges his booty into the end zone at an even higher rate than before, Saquon is also near the top of the league in rushing touchdowns because he doesn't need the ball at the one. He'll just take it in from 40 yards out instead. Philly's rushing attack would make a heck of a golfer because they've got the short game and the long game down pat. For the Commanders, it's Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. Look at that. Terry finally got a quarterback. Funny what a guy can do when he doesn't have Taylor Heineke or one-leg Alex Smith throwing him the ball. Honestly, the Commanders' entire offense has been their calling card this season, but the Jaden Terry connection is the biggest highlight. By the end of the year, Terry's yards and receptions probably won't look much different than previous years, but as for the touchdowns, he's already set a new career high because the Washington offense isn't playing the end zone as lava anymore. I've always been a fan of Terry, so it's nice to see him and this organization succeed almost immediately after dumping their scumbag owner. And it's even nicer when they're doing better than the Cowboys. The Cowboys' iconic duo is Jerry Jones and dementia. I've talked plenty of times about the Cowboys' lack of free agent moves and how their outlook was pretty bleak from the beginning, but Jerry Jones has done nothing but make things even worse throughout the year. Threatening to fire Dallas radio hosts for suggesting he should have signed Derrick Henry, losing his mind over the idea of putting shades in his stadium so his players don't get blinded in critical moments, hyping up a trade deadline acquisition that turned out to be Jonathan Mingo, repeatedly giving Mike McCarthy verbal job security. The man has lost the plot. But it shouldn't be that surprising that he's becoming increasingly out of touch because he is 82 years old! Time to take a nap and have some cranberry juice, Jerry. Leave the football to someone else. And for the Giants, it's Daniel Jones and being exactly who we thought he was. When the Giants handed Jones $160 million over 4 years, my first thought was, why did they do that? And now, almost 2 years later, my thought is still, why did they do that? The Giants paid Jones after a season where he threw just 15 touchdowns in 16 games. And to his credit, he did add 7 more on the ground, but nothing ever suggested he was worth $40 million a year. Still, New York deluded themselves into thinking they could turn him into a quarterback worth that much money, and that miscalculation led them here, to the end of 2024, where they look back and realize they should have spent the last 2 years doing literally anything other than trying to make Daniel Jones work. They could have drafted someone, signed someone, they could have made Kadarius Toney their full-time quarterback for a year, and it still would have been a better use of their time than trotting Daniel Jones out there every week. But they were committed. Now all that's left to do is watch him somehow become a Pro Bowler in Minnesota.